Hey, Sam.
Alasdair, hello. You're right.
I'm very well, thanks, darling. Once again, we are sweating.
It's been hot. I was at the beach today, and without realising it, I've both burned and tanned myself. As the evening's gone on, I'm just seeing it turn like less of a tan and more just red burns.
Creeping pinky that's going to peel.
Exactly. I think it's one of those days. Oh, how are you?
I'm fine for these because with being very professional podcasters, you need to minimize your background sound. That's kind of podcast 101, which means no fans, no open windows. And it's fine. And it's a worthwhile struggle because it's a really exciting topic today.
So we are here at the Pride finale of the Wholala Pride Month celebrations. We have done all things Doctor Who Pride. We've spoken to the co-hosts and performers of the Gallifrey Cabaret, a queer Doctor Who cabaret show. We've looked at episodes with the first openly lesbian companion. We've celebrated camp with Kylie Minogue, and we have looked at episodes that make us proud, that everyone else seemed to hate. And this week we have a very, very special finale to the Wholala Pride Month celebrations, where we are listening to voice notes from people all across the Whoniverse, sharing their stories of what it means to grow up loving Doctor Who and why the show resonates so much with them.
Very excited for this one. So we put out the call to get your voice notes to be a part of this episode, and we had we've got a global selection of really great, thoughtful voice notes, which were really touching, and you'll get to hear those in this episode, and we'll be listening to those and discussing those.
Yes, no, exactly. We are so happy and proud of how many voice notes that you guys have sent. Thank you so much for taking the time to send us your messages and voice notes.
It made us feel so special because so many, well done for doing this, brownie points. So many people open with like, I love listening to Wholala, Wholala. And I was like, oh, you do? You do?
I was like, is there a microphone? People listen to this? I was like,
people listen. That's the really weird bit to me, is getting a human being we've not met say they listen to this and enjoy this. I'm like, oh, that's nice.
It's not just in my head.
It's not in my head. Oh my God, I'm not insane. I haven't been doing this for 36 weeks to myself.
We love, obviously, looking back on our childhood and how the show connected with us and seeing about like where the show lies on our queer journeys. But I just thought it was really interesting to see like how other queer Doctor Who fans feel about growing up with the show and discovering their queerness, I guess, while watching the show. And it's been really interesting to hear through a perspective of sexuality and gender and all kinds of like points on the spectrum, how the show really has resonated with so many people, and I've just loved getting to hear like the perspectives of people that aren't just you. I'm so sorry to say it, Alasdair, but it's been quite nice.
No, it's true. Like, this is what's fascinating, is at a certain point, right, we've been talking for 36 weeks about how it resonates with us and our memories of it, and it's actually quite validating as well to listen to other people, and you'll hear those great voice notes very shortly, but hear them talk about their unique experiences as well, because they are so different to ours, and the different points that people have come into it and how things have had meaning for them is so interesting as well, how different parts of the show resonate with different people for different reasons and where they kind of fit in their personal journeys.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm very excited to get to share all of those voice notes with you, dear listener.
So I think we wanted to kick you off with a little bit of context, my friends, a little bit of context about the queer Whoniverse, because we're not going to make this super academic, because first and foremost, we're not academics. And most of our references come from the TARDIS Wiki, which is an invaluable resource, but we're by no means kind of Doctor Who historians. Well, I thought for this, I'd start us off with looking back at the classics of Doctor Who and asking, was there any LGBTQ plus representation in classic Who? And not really, at least not on screen.
Yeah.
So it's not just that there's no gay relationships in classic Who. There's not really any relationships in classic Who. It's a very sexless run of Doctor Who compared to what it is now. Even the relationship between the original companions, Ian and Barbara, is pretty loveless and touchless, and basically just implied. And you get very subtle hints at LGBT representation in some aspects, you know, towards the much later run.
Yeah.
I think there's some like really sparse lesbian undertones between Ace and Kara in the 1989 story Survival, the then final story. But there are, of course, many Doctor Who stories that don't have any explicit LGBTQ plus characters, but are just the gayest thing ever.
Oh,
which I think
every single time that the Rani is on screen, I'm like, you know what? You know how the gays love like a strong, badass woman? Like, she is the like gay icon of the time and of the now.
Yeah, the Rani. So Sylvester McCoy's debut, Time and the Rani, maybe takes the gay cake in this category. This is a quote I found on this episode. Kate O'Mara swanning around a quarry in knee-high boots, wearing a beauty spot she takes the time to reapply. The TARDIS landing in a rainbow on a planet with a pink sky, and Bonnie Langford being shot over a cliff in a Christmas bauble.
It is camp. I mean, like, Doctor Who as a whole
camp.
is camp, and I think a lot of classic Doctor Who is camp, which is so funny because at the time they would have, like, you know, Doctor Who going on from the 60s on through to the 80s, they would have tried so hard to make sure that it wasn't camp and it wasn't coming off as queer. And there's that really funny clip that I know that you love as well of Kate O'Mara playing the Rani in Dimensions in Time, and I think it's the director of it comes up to her and is like, well, you know, a bit less camp next time.
Not too camp at the end.
Not too camp at the end. And she's like, whoa, I thought this was a camp show. I've been under this illusion all these years. Like, it's so funny.
It's so good. She's so aware of its kind of camp status, I think, which is what's really funny about Doctor Who. Mm-hmm. It's interesting as well. Waris Hussein was the first director for Doctor Who on TV, and he was interviewed for an episode of the Fan Show on LGBTQ plus issues, and he said that he is gay and has a partner. So first director of Doctor Who is gay.
We'd love to see it.
Yes. And there were obviously actors who had been cast in the classic series who were gay as well, but often those actors hadn't made their sexuality public because the social climate was very difficult at the time. Being gay was nowhere near as socially acceptable. Actors like Matthew Waterhouse, who played Adric, there were very few gay actors who appeared in the classic series who had their sexual orientation publicly known at the time.
Exactly. I didn't even realise that he was queer. That's so interesting.
Well, there we go. In terms of openly gay individuals to have worked on the show, one of the most significant in a production capacity is maybe the longest running producer, John Nathan Turner. Mm-hmm. Having previously worked as a production member on the series, Nathan Turner took over the producer role from Series 18 through the final 10 years of the classic run. And he actually noted that in casting openly gay actors in the show, he got some backlash from British tabloids for that at the time.
Oh, really? So when would that would have been like, if it was last 10 years, that would have been like late 70s, early 80s, right?
I think so, in the 80s, yeah. There have been lots of other people who've worked on the show in a very significant capacity as well since then. Mark Gatiss is one. He's been a major creative force on Doctor Who since the 90s. He's done stories, TV, audio, and, of course, the first openly gay actor in any medium to portray a unique incarnation of the Master.
Yes, of course. See, I forget that I always think it's quite funny because he's played so many characters like on screen. Doctor, obviously, who was in the Lazarus Experiment, and then he played, I believe, the Brigadier's dad, I think, in Twice Upon a Time. But then he's also played so many Doctor Who characters in expanded media as well. He really is just plus. He's also played the Doctor, I think, in some Wilderness Years projects as well. So he really has like gotten about there. He's
gotten himself in plenty of episodes. He gets around with the roles, and Sherlock as well.
He was also in Closing Time as well. He was the alien that was playing chess with the Doctor.
Derek Jacobi, also gay?
Yes.
Okay, so we have another gay actor as the Master then, which makes absolute sense to me.
Completely. I know. I mean, the Master, sometimes the Master seems a little bit fruity.
Seems a little fruity to me.
I'll say that.
I'll say that. We've had Russell T Davies, obviously, as showrunner, brought in a whole swathe of LGBT representation to the show, including the first openly queer character in the first series, Captain Jack Harkness, played by an openly gay actor, John Barrowman. We've also had other gay actors in the series, Andrew Hayden Smith, who was gorgeous.
Was, is, and always forever will be.
Is, will always be, let's get that man back. We had celebrity queer actors join the show as well. We got Alan Cumming. We got Stephen Fry have been in the series.
Mm-hmm.
More recently, we had Bethany Black play Doctor Who's first transgender actress on television. She played the character 474 in Sleep No More.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, not great episode. Rebecca Root was the first trans actress on audio, playing the character Sable in Big Finish audio dramas. Trans writer Juno Dawson, who we're both a fan of, also made history as the first openly trans lead writer on a BBC-produced Doctor Who series.
Redacted, honey.
Redacted! You loved it, right?
I loved it. I loved it so much. And we were talking as well on International Women's Day, when we did the Wholala post about International Women's Day, we were talking about Juno. I love her writing. I think that it's so well done. I really want to see her. I think I was watching an interview with her and they were saying, like, what would you want to do next? And she was like, the dream would be an on-screen episode. Like, I can't wait to, and hopefully, especially with like Russell's era being brought in, I hope to see Juno Dawson written story on screen.
It's safe to say then, in New Who, we got fed. Whether it is beautiful elderly lesbians living in the car together in the year 5 billion in New York.
New York.
What is it they say about not being sisters?
There's a line in the episode where I think Brannigan calls them like the sisters, and she goes, Brannigan, you know this full well, we're not sisters, we're married. And then Brannigan's like, oh, come on, I'm an old-fashioned cat like me. And I'm like, Brannigan, are you homophobic?
Is Brannigan the first openly homophobic character in Doctor Who?
Listen, Brannigan made a litter of cats with someone that was not a cat. So I feel like maybe you're not the first person to judge a queer relationship.
Yeah. Or lesbian space puddles, which we also discussed very recently.
We did. Still making eyes at a puddle.
It's been a long old journey, Sam.
It has been a long old journey, and that is not the end of it. Of course, we have plenty of queer representation on screen in Doctor Who spin-offs. In all the spin-offs, I believe, in Torchwood, Sarah Jane Adventures, and Class. Obviously, in Torchwood, we had the relationship with Jack being a pansexual lead for the series. That was in 2007, I believe. We get to see his relationship with Yanto, and also like Yanto's bisexuality with his previous girlfriend, Lisa. One of my favourite characters in Doctor Who in general, Luke Smith. We got to see him grow on the show, and as mentioned before in our previous queer episode, they were originally hoping, Russell wanted to write that Luke was going to discover his sexuality at uni and get into a relationship with Sanjay, his friend from university, and sadly, because of Olivia Sladen's passing, that couldn't happen, but it was canonised in Farewell Sarah Jane, which, as I've said before, can't watch without crying. I still can't watch it without crying.
Yeah, going back to Torchwood, which I guess was the more kind of grown-up spin-off that could do things a little ahead of Doctor Who. I like the way that this is written on the TARDIS wiki. Torchwood showed all members of the main cast in some sort of non-heterosexual situation in at least one episode of the series. I like that phrasing.
Me too. In series 1 of Torchwood, every single member of the main Torchwood cast had a same-sex kiss on screen.
I like a non-heterosexual situation. You've got to be in one of those at least once a day.
I love that, like, you and me have just been living our lives for our whole lives in a non-heterosexual situation.
In a non-heterosexual situation. After becoming showrunner of Doctor Who, Stephen Moffat carried on introducing queer characters. We had Canton Everett Delaware in The Day of the Moon, who is longing to marry a man back in 1960s America, where this is legally impossible. Perhaps the most notable were the recurring characters of Madame Vastra and Jenny Flint, a married lesbian couple, introduced in A Good Man Goes to War. I'm really sorry. In the last Queer Whoniverse, I really slated their relationship, and I feel really bad about it. I was being far too candid. I was like, yeah, this is kind of icky to me. Not because they're lesbians, let me first of all be clear.
I feel like you need to clarify that.
It was because of the lizard. I was like, why do our lesbians have to be lizards? And that was the complaint I was having.
Oh my God.
I'm at peace with it. It means a lot to people. It was kind of nice. I'm sorry, okay?
I do like that he wrote a regular queer character who still have like new stories. They had Big Finish stories as the Pathmaster Gang. But yeah, like their one like on-screen kiss was like her sharing her lizard breath with her because she has more oxygen or something. I was like, this is dumb.
Did you know that sharing of breath got 9 Ofcom complaints? That's a true fact.
I don't know why that doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me either. Are you still with us, listeners? Because we're nearly there. We're getting up to speed now. It's just that the representation is coming so bloody thick and fast now. It's hard to keep up.
I know.
We also got Miss Clara Oswald. Now, this was also a criticism that we made last time, was that we didn't feel that perhaps this representation was as padded out as it should be. And we got a few kind of fleeting throwaway lines about her sexuality. Apparently, in the Day of the Doctor novelization, which is written by Stephen Moffat, her sexuality is explicit and undeniable.
Okay, well, that's good.
What was quite nice is in the latest Doctor Who magazine, they reflected on the significance of Clara being bisexual in the show's legacy. And this is the quote, if I may.
You may.
This is why I subscribe. I'm getting my values worth. I pay a lot of money for this. For most of the kids growing up in the wilderness years when Doctor Who was off air, such comments from a teacher would have been unthinkable. Section 28, a piece of legislation effectively banning the promotion of homosexuality in classrooms, was introduced in the UK in 1988, which was also the year we saw Coal Hill School for the first time in the original run of Doctor Who. The law was repealed in 2003, the same year that Doctor Who was announced as returning from the void. And although it may seem a relatively small amount, there's something satisfyingly triumphant about Clara owning her identity in a setting where she couldn't have done not long before. Nice one, Impossible Girl.
Nice one, Impossible Girl. No, that is true. I do think that there's something like a nice sort of like full circle moment when she's in the place that literally started the whole show in the 60s, and she can be so open and candid about her sexuality. I do think there's something poetic about that.
There is something nice about that, and I think I hadn't made that real world link either about her being a teacher and the link to Section 28, so I think that's really nice too.
Yeah, no, for sure.
We talked a lot about Bill Potts quite recently when we were talking about our episode A Star in Her Eye, which is about her debut episode, the pilot. From Chibnall's era, from Series 11 onwards, we got multiple appearances of queer side characters. And the series also acknowledged the scholarly belief that James I was attracted to men to some degree.
There you go.
But there you go. But perhaps the most significant thing that happened during this era was the relationship that built between Yaz and 13. It was something that I think these fans had observed before it was planned, and they decided behind the scenes that they would kind of allow it to be something that developed with a slow burn. I'm not sure how slow or how much it burnt, but it was there and it was set up. So from kind of the Flux onwards, where the 13th Doctor is leaving an adaptive hologram behind for Yaz and saying how much I miss you, and all these lovely kind of little interactions like that. And then later the scenes between the two of them, which are quite romantically charged, when the 13th Doctor says to Yaz, I want to tell you everything. And Yaz says, I'd like that. And they're interrupted by Dan before they can finish speaking. And then Eve of the Daleks finally explicitly confirmed that Yaz harbored romantic feelings for the 13th Doctor, and left ambiguous how the Doctor felt. Legend of the Sea Devils was the episode that established the 13th Doctor also felt the same, but didn't feel comfortable enough to act on them, saying that dates aren't something I really do, you know. I mean, I used to, have done, and if I was going to, believe me, it'd be with you. And she later elaborated on this, saying her concerns were more about her mortality and ending a relationship. But if it was anyone, it would be you.
I do think it, in my opinion, ended, like you said, it slow burner that didn't really burn. Like, there wasn't even an on-screen kiss. It was, a lot of stuff was implied, like heavily implied, obviously.
It got so close.
It got so close. Yeah. I for a show that like in 2005 had Captain Jack kissing the Doctor, to then not be able to have a relationship where the Doctor clearly would have wanted to be in a relationship with Yaz, to have no explicit on-screen like acting on that. And then also the episode end with her being like, I have to go, Yaz, like by myself. Ta-ra! Like, yeah. I feel like it could have been more, and I'm hoping that they then like build on those kinds of relationships in Who going forwards.
They've kind of got to, because otherwise the Doctor's excuse there doesn't really make a lot of sense. The excuse was like, if I do fix myself to somebody, sooner or later it'll hurt. But there's a nice moment at least. The 13th Doctor says to her, I think you're one of the greatest people I've ever known, including my wife. And at least that was uttered by a woman on screen, which is nice.
Exactly. Period. Now, we're not going to leave you on tenterhooks anymore. With no further ado, we're going to start diving into all of the voice notes sent to us by our lovely listeners. The first was sent in by Georgia Bunker, and this is what she had to say.
Hi Sam and Alasdair, my name's Georgia. I'm a bisexual woman from Australia and I've been a fan of New Who ever since 2005 when my dad made it mandatory viewing for him and little 8-year-old me. I've actually done a rewatch recently with my partner and it reminded me that Doctor Who was the first place I ever saw positive queer stories being told, and the way that sexuality is often displayed as a spectrum on the show has been really awesome and affirming to me. It brings me so much pride and joy and makes me feel so safe and seen. And so does your podcast. Keep up the great work, guys.
Oh, it's so lovely. Thank you,
That's
Georgia.
the loveliest thing in the world. I can't believe a podcast, first of all. It means a lot, I think, to both of us that you enjoy the podcast this much. I'm really, really grateful. And we're so grateful for you taking the time to send that.
And it was really lovely to hear about you watching the show with your dad. I feel like I've said before, my first introduction to Doctor Who was my dad showing me the 1960s Dalek movies. And I remember watching that with him. And I feel like that was like a really nice connection that I had with him. So it's nice to hear that you had the same experience.
I totally agree. My experience as well was my dad introducing me to the show, and I think he watched all of series 1 with me. Shout out to all the dads who introduced us to the show that would turn us gay.
Let's hear it for the dads.
Let's hear it for the dads. Yeah, I really feel that comment as well about the show making you feel safe. It really is such a comfort show as well, isn't it? Like, you know, if you really want something that just makes you feel good, that you just want to smile along to, going back to just about any episode of Doctor Who, it just gives you that kind of nice warm blanket feeling as soon as you go back to it, right?
Exactly. It's always my comfort show. If I'm ever feeling like down and I just want to watch, I know that different people have different things that they watch. I know, like, my boyfriend, for example, he always watches rom-coms, or he'll watch like Mean Girls, or he'll watch Easy A, or movies like that. And for me, it's always been Doctor Who, especially sort of the era that I was like a child watching, like Russell and Stevens eras. And I think that Doctor Who is a space that makes you feel safe, both within like discovering yourself and also just when you're having a down day. So yeah, I really related to that too. Fancy another one? Now, the next voice note we have, I was very excited to see come through. It's from Emma O'Neill Detail. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced the end of your surname. I've been following this person on Instagram for ages. I love seeing all their posts, and I was very excited to hear what they have to say.
Hi, Sam and Alasdair. I love the podcast so much. Greetings from Washington, D.C., USA. My name is Emma. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm on Instagram at Queer Doctor Who. Being a Doctor Who fan and being queer are pretty much inextricable from each other for me. I started to realize I was queer at the same time that I started to watch Doctor Who, and the unrequited and star-crossed romances between the Doctor and the companions reflected how I was feeling as a closeted queer teenager, wondering if I could ever find love. I often wished that the Doctor would come and whisk me away because I was so dissatisfied with my life. The TARDIS seemed like a portal out of the closet and into the universe. Fast forward 10 years, and I'm still here, still queer, still a Doctor Who fan. I no longer want to be whisked away from my life because I'm proud of who I am and I love the life that I have. I now live in a world where we have a queer doctor and a queer relationship at the center of the show, and that's something my younger self never could have even dreamed of. Doctor Who will always be the show that held my hand through the hardest moments of growing up queer, and now I get to celebrate making it through by connecting with queer Whovians all over the world. I love you all. Mwah.
Mwah.
So lovely. Mwah indeed.
This is the loveliest note. I was listening to these earlier on, and this note from you, Emma, is just the most beautiful thing. I really, really am so happy to hear that you no longer want to be whisked away and that you love the life you have. I just thought that was such a beautiful note, really. I just really adored that. I found that really touching.
Yeah, me too. I think that a lot of people feel the same way, and I really liked how you sort of put together the thought of the Doctor taking, you know, the companions away and taking them out of their life, and sort of matching that with how you were feeling at the time, because I've definitely felt like that as well, where I feel like I just want someone magical to take me out of the situation I'm in, especially when I was discovering my sexuality, as it's really something that you have to it's difficult to come to terms with, and it does seem like it'd be easier if someone took you out of your life. And certainly with like time travel, to use an allegory for that, I would always be like, I just want to see what my life's going to be down the line. I want to know who I'm going to become. And I'm really glad to hear that. I loved when you said you're still here, still queer, and still a Doctor Who fan. Me too, girl. And I think that is just so lovely to hear, because same in my boat, I am really happy with where my life is and who I've become, and so proud of the journey that I've been on. And that wouldn't have happened if I was taken away, and I couldn't have skipped all the things that happened to me, because the person I am today is a product of those things happening. So that really resonated with me.
I really, resonate with that part about wanting to be whisked away. I think that's what's really interesting as well. The difference between wanting to be whisked away by the Doctor at a point in your life where you're feeling just like you're not comfortable in your own skin and you just don't love the context you live in and you're just not happy with the life you lead, and wanting to be whisked away for an adventure because actually you are still really proud of who you are and comfortable with who you are, and wanting to travel with the Doctor in that context is quite a different thing. And there have definitely been points in my life when I wanted to vanish, and coming to terms with your sexuality is such a journey. And there have been points in my life as well, like I think all of us have really been in that place where you really want to magic away like being gay, and that's like the biggest wish. I mean, not everyone experiences this, but I certainly did, which was I wish there was just some magic pill I could take that would just turn me straight. And nowadays I'm often saying like, I love being gay. Like I just know such like a wonderful, colorful community of people, and I have so much fun and so many laughs and feel so able to express myself for being kind of comfortable with my queer identity now. And it's really rewarding when you kind of, I think, reach that point in your journey. And I think, if anyone is struggling with that, you will get to that point, and it's really lovely when you do.
Mm-hmm. I completely resonate with that. I definitely had times when I was a kid and when I was growing up, and it takes you a while, I think, when you're growing up queer to realize that you are, because I think there really is like a step of like admitting it to yourself. And I for the longest time, I didn't want to admit it to myself, and I wished that I was different, and I wished that I wasn't like I was. And like you said, Alasdair, I listen. I love straight people. I'm even friends with some of them.
That's nice of you.
I always say I feel like being straight is so boring. I think everyone should be queer. I think that it really did allow me. There was a really sweet moment. Not to get personal on the podcast, not to be recounting personal stories, but I remember I came out just before I went to university in the summer between finishing my sixth form college and going to uni, and I had been to uni for a few months. It was the first time that I had gone into a new sort of social situation out of the closet, and I remember becoming so much more of a confident person. I was never a confident child. I was always a shy kid, and I think anyone who knows me now knows I'm the opposite of shy. I mean, Alistair, you only know me as an adult.
You will approach anyone, and you are very confident in yourself, and I've never thought of you as a shy character.
No, well, this is the thing, and I think that I can attribute all of that to really finally being able to be who I truly was. And I remember sitting down with my nan, my grandma, and she just sort of took a moment. She said to me, she was like, "I'm so proud of you." And I was like, "Why?" And at that point, I wasn't out to her. I was only out to like my immediate like parents and siblings and friends. And she said to me, she was like, "I can just see that like uni's been really good for you. Like you've really come out of your shell. You just seem much more happier, and I can really tell that uni is doing you like the world of good." And in my head, I was like, "You don't know." And of course, like this was years ago. My whole family know now, but I was like, "You don't know how much this means to me, because uni's great, but that's not why I'm suddenly more confident and happier. It really is just that I'm finally being able to live who I authentically am." And I thought that was a really sweet moment.
Do you think she knew? Do you think she knew until?
I think it'd be kind of hard not to, because when I was younger, she used to sew dresses for my Barbies. So
She knew.
But moving on from stories of me and my grandma, we're going to move on to the next voice note. Now, this is from Sahari Asir.
Hi, Sam and Alasdair. First of all, mandatory. Love the show. It's brilliant. Everyone should go listen to it. Second of all, I'm a bigender fan from Canada, and I wanted to bring up the idea of the Doctor as being a queer character by himself. Specifically because that's how I went through the journey with her. As I discovered that I was trans, it was in 2021 that I really fully accepted it. But my trans journey started in 2017 when the doctor regenerated into a woman, because I had been watching since 2013 when I was 10 years old with Peter Capaldi, and having the doctor, who was such a role model to me, change gender like that and express this new side of herself that way really made me think about my own identity through that. So if you want, you can discuss that.
Thank you so much for that. It's really lovely to hear your connection with Jodie's doctor and how your journey and your own gender identity really sort of parallels Jodie's. Obviously, being the first female doctor, there's the whole regeneration of themselves there. And we've kind of talked about this allegory before on the podcast, but I feel like as queer people, whenever I start that sentence, I always think I'm going to go into that RuPaul quote, which is as queer people, we get to choose our film. I feel like as queer people, we are constantly regenerating ourselves, be that in our sexuality or our gender identity or gender expression, use of pronouns. And I think that there's a lot to explore. And I really liked when you were talking about the doctor, you've used both pronouns talking about the same person, because they are both he and she and everyone in between. And I think that there's such an amazing and interesting and complex character. And so many of the viewers of the show are just like that too. We're all complex and interesting, and we toe the line of being male and being female and having attributes of both. And it's really interesting hearing you talk about your journey discovering your bi-gender and how that parallels with 13.
Something that really, I think, appeals to LGBTQ plus fans is, I think, the idea of regenerating, because when the Doctor regenerates, they've got this whole new self to kind of introduce to the world. And there's kind of two things that has to happen. One is the Doctor has to kind of get familiar with who they are, both kind of spiritually and physically, which is really interesting. And then there's that kind of reintroduction to the world, either to some of their closest friends, their kind of chosen family, to strangers, to enemies, whoever. The Doctor has to kind of do this whole kind of here's who I am and here's what I stand for all over again, which is really interesting. And there's this kind of almost, dare I say, coming out as the Doctor that happens every time, which I think is always quite interesting. Now, on the queer Doctor reading, it's really interesting because I think there's so many different ways that people can look at the character of the Doctor, and I think looking at the Doctor as a queer character makes total sense. There have been a few actors actually have gone on the record and saying they think the Doctor is asexual. I think Matt Smith said that, and a couple of others as well. They think that the Doctor just experiences sex and sexuality in a way that's so alien that they're kind of effectively asexual. But I think, in my perspective, the Doctor really is a queer character in that it seems that kind of their experience of sex and relationships that their experience of love and sex kind of transcends their physical body, and it's something else that kind of happens beyond that. So I think it makes sense that from a human perspective, the Doctor is probably a queer character.
So moving on, we have friend of the podcast, and I always throw this term around when I'm talking about people like Russell T Davies and Murray Gold. I say friend of the pod, and then I'm just to clarify, we don't know who that person is. Yeah, friend of Dorothy. But in this case, we do. We're about to hear a voice note from Damla Duru, who is the co-host of the Come Along Pond podcast.
Hello, Wholala. It's Damla from Come Along Pond podcast. I wanted to send a voice note and happy Pride, first of all. What do I love about the show? I mean, as a queer woman, honestly, this show's just been home for me for the last... How many years have I loved Doctor Who now? Definitely at least 16 years, is it? Gosh. But it's been home for me as a queer woman. When I was younger, I just had these, growing up, having these thoughts and getting these feelings towards women specifically, because I'm bi, so having those thoughts towards women, I just thought I was abnormal and strange. And seeing, for example, Captain Jack, kiss the Ninth Doctor, and various other things I can't think off the top of my head right now, but just seeing all of the queer representation, Clara, Madame Vastra, everything like that. It just made me feel normal and made me realise it's normal. It's not weird. It's who you are. It's part of your identity, and it's beautiful. And this show just continues to do that for so many people. And for me as well, and I love it, and I love you guys, I love the podcast, you know this, we know this. But yeah, happy Pride, shout out to the gays.
Shout out to the gays.
I want that on a
Happy
t-shirt.
Pride, we haven't said that yet.
Oh yeah, happy Pride. Thank you so much for sending that voice note in, Damla. And I completely agree with you. I think Doctor Who does feel like home for a lot of us. I don't think there's many things in your life that you keep coming back to in the same way that you do like your favourite show. And with something like Doctor Who that means so much to so many people and it really like unifies people, it feels like home, and you can really start to create your own little like family. Like certainly through doing this podcast and becoming more active on Doctor Who like socials, we've made so many like real life friends with people because of this, like yourself and people that we've had on the podcast and people that we wouldn't have met if it wasn't for this show. So I think that beyond just being something that you enjoy, I think that shows like Doctor Who really do bring people together. Come on, Doctor Who, bringing families together since 1963.
Doctor Who, bringing families together. That's so true. No, I'm echoing that. Yeah, damn, I totally agree with you. Doctor Who has absolutely felt like home for us for a long time. When you were saying how long you've been a Doctor Who fan, I was trying to add it up because I'm 27 now. I've been a fan since I was 8. So that's a huge majority of my life that Doctor Who has been there. And the message of Doctor Who, you know, in that time has really always been about exploring this big, crazy universe and kind of embracing life in all of its forms, whatever that might look like, and always being kind and always approaching things with an open mind and always trying to do the right thing and be generous and accept people as they are. So, yeah, I think it's nice as well that for you, I think, then seeing queer characters on screen, it just felt like we fit in with that big, complex, mad universe and that we're kind of a nice, normal part of it as well is really nice. So, you know, I'm really hearing that and I love it. I agree with you. That's how I feel too.
So our next voice note has been sent to us by Murray Grove.
So listening to Wholala has really made me think about how Doctor Who was a far more queer experience for me growing up than I'd actually realised. And my queer Doctor Who memory is that when I was about 9, I had a 9th and 10th Doctor set of dolls, and I used to play with them, and I loved it. But I also remember that I had a bit of a moment where I said, "Now kiss," and I made Christopher Eccleston and David Tennant make out as Doctor Who dolls and very much enjoyed it. And I didn't know what queer was then, but I sure do now, and hadn't really appreciated until listening to your podcast and remembering that memory, how formative Doctor Who was as a queer awakening for me.
That's funny. We've had so many beautiful notes, but this is somehow, I think, maybe my favourite. Now kiss.
There's something so I remember when I was younger I had loads of Doctor action figures and I used to get so pissy if anyone called them dolls, and I think there is some like deep rooted homophobia there where I'm like, no, they're not dolls, like dolls are for girls and these are action figures and they're dolls. You're right, they're dolls.
Baby.
I love that. I love you're making your 9 and 10 dolls kiss, and I think that it's interesting. I'm really glad that through listening with Wholala, I think we've realised as well. I don't think me and Alice quite realised until we started doing this podcast as well, just how sort of deep rooted Doctor Who is in our being queer and discovery of queerness. I definitely had a few crushes growing up on certain Doctor Who actors, and I remember there's a funny story actually. When I was in school, I was doing, I think it was an English class, and I was doing a group activity, and it was all girls, and they were like, "Who's your big celebrity crush? Who's your celebrity crush?" And they were going around the table saying all their crushes were, and it got to me and I would have been like maybe 13, and I genuinely like, I hadn't quite come to terms with the fact that I was gay, but I knew I didn't have a crush on a woman. And they were like, "Who's your crush?" And I literally was like, right, who is the most attractive woman? Like, who can I say that will really like prove to them that I'm straight? And I was like,
yeah,
Billie Piper.
Billie Piper.
Billie Piper, exactly.
You say that, except I did have a big childhood crush on Billie Piper.
There you go.
And when she was in Secret Diary for me, that was very confusing for me at that time. There was a lot of very complex feelings happening at that time. More complex, in fact, when I found 11th Doctor fan fiction, but that's a story for another day.
Oh my god, no, I would watch the scene of Matt Smith in Secret Diary of a Call Girl quite a lot. I wasn't really paying attention to Billy. I'm sorry, Billy. But thank you for that voice note, Murray. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of really interesting levels to discovering your queerness in the relation with Doctor Who, and it's quite a funny story. Me and Alice were laughing while listening to that. We really liked hearing that story, so thanks for sharing that.
It's so funny. I was reading Murray Grove and I was like, Murray Gold?
Murray Gold sent us one? Oh
Murray
my
Gold?
God. Alistair, when we were deciding to do this episode, Alistair turns to me and he's like, should we ask Russell to do one?
Should we ask Russell to do this? And I did. I didn't hold back. I messaged him. I mean, I don't think he even read it, but you know what? You don't ask, you don't get.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And we
Can you
messaged.
imagine if that was the last clip?
Oh my God. I mean, literally, yeah. At the end of this whole, like, and now a special voice note from...
One from Russell?
Davies. One from Russell.
God, that'd be so good, wouldn't it?
Oh, it'd be amazing. So our next message was sent to us by Ryan. It was a DM text message, so I'll read this one for you. Ryan said, I owe a lot to Doctor Who for making me the man I am today, but also I owe a lot to Torchwood. While I was far too young to watch it with my dad, him seeing Jack and Ianto made him a lot more comfortable with queer people in general. I honestly think that if he didn't watch Torchwood, then I might not have been as accepted by him as I was when I came out. That's really lovely to hear, and I think that a lot of people won't go out of their way, especially at that time, like in the mid-2000s, to watch a quote-unquote gay show if you weren't in that community. You're like, oh, I don't want to watch that. Like, that's a gay show. And I think Torchwood wasn't a gay show. It was a Doctor Who show. And if you like Doctor Who, as I'm sure your dad does, then you want to watch it. And that was why it was such a good opening, I'll say, for people who wouldn't necessarily be exposed to queer media or queer characters to suddenly be really connecting with them on an emotional level and caring about them as characters and caring about what happens to them. And I'm really glad that you were met with acceptance from your dad. And if Torchwood had a part to play in that, I'm really glad that that was there for both of you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your note. Second of all, coming out to your parents is really hard. It's horrendous. I put it off for as long as I possibly could. And I find it interesting as well, like my coming out experience. I was out to my friends a lot earlier than I was out to my parents because I just found it such a difficult and awkward conversation to have. I didn't really fear a backlash. I just felt it was almost more convenient to keep it tucked away. And it's tricky because then I think as well, the way that people describe coming out conversations, you almost expect it to be this like huge dramatic revelation, and I think almost the way that it's hyped up as well as this like it'll be this big weight off your shoulders and you'll finally be you and da da da. It really like builds anticipation towards that event as well, and can actually I think make you quite anxious about it. I think as well all of this really speaks to the value of really good representation, as you say, Sam, in shows that aren't specifically kind of like, you know, queer shows, in that they're embedded. You know, we have queer people represented as ordinary people who have a story just like any other cis straight people do in the universe as well, and equally have wonderful valid relationships in those worlds as well. And I think making people more comfortable with those as they're shown on screen, and it makes it harder for, you know, stereotypes and, you know, hateful ideas to win, really, because I think when you've met and known queer people in your life, it's hard to vilify and demonize queer people because you know them.
Yeah.
And I think on some level that's what happens with good representation in TV too, because you have then some relatable picture you can work with. And so that probably was helpful, I think, on some level at least, you know, for your dad to have some idea of what does a modern queer person look like.
Yeah, no, completely. I feel like queer representation in all forms is going to help people that might not meet queer people otherwise not fear the unknown. People are scared of what they don't know. And I think that having a show like Doctor Who and shows like Torchwood, where people are watching it for the content of the show, introduce queer characters or just diverse characters in general, it's really going to help with people's understanding of who they are and maybe take away some stigmas that they might have otherwise thought.
Agree. Hard agree.
I'm
aware as well my coming out story there didn't have a nice resolution. I just said it's terrifying and left it at that. All I'd say is, you know, come out in your own time, in your own way, when you feel safe to do so, really, because you don't owe it to anyone to share that before you're ready to. And it can feel great, I think, when you've done it and you shared it with people and you know you're accepted by them and you're not having to conceal anything anymore. That really is great.
Yeah.
And you know, when I've then been in happy gay relationships, I've been able to share that with my parents. That's been really special. And, you know, introduce them to them, share that with them. They're not involved. Have dinner together, yeah.
Yeah.
It's, you know what I mean? Like, that's been great. So, like, I mean, not long after I came out, I ended up in a long-term relationship, and I'm glad that I'd come out when that happened. But, you know, it's not something you owe to anybody.
No, completely. Everyone does it at different paces. It's interesting hearing your coming out story, because for me, I knew my parents and who they were, and I knew that I wouldn't feel comfortable, for me, coming out to people before I'd come out to them, because I was just so worried that, like, if they heard in any other way, it would have not been right for the situation we were in. So my parents were actually the first people I told. I remember it was like a week after my 18th birthday, and I sat down and told them, and then later sort of started telling friends and stuff. So yeah, it coming out looks different for everyone. You've got to do it at your own pace, and I'm really glad that you felt like you had this connection with queerness between you and your dad before you even came out, because of shows like Torchwood. So moving on to our next voice note, we're lucky enough to have someone who's already featured on the podcast before, Mr. Ethan Posford, send us a voice note.
Hello, Wholala listeners. This is Ethan here. You may or may not have seen me around on Doctor Who Twitter, or you may have heard me recently on the Wholala episode where we are discussing fandom culture in Doctor Who fandom. Happy Pride Month, everyone. I've previously spoke about queer characters like Bill Potts and Yasmin Khan on the podcast. However, there's one character I've not mentioned in the episode, and that was Luke Smith. I feel like he means a lot to me as a character personally, as I've always related to him in the way that he feels like an outsider and he has desires to feel like he fits into society, which I feel like a lot of people in this fandom can relate to, whether they're queer, neurodivergent, etc., which, well, I'm both of those things. And we see how he struggles to fit into society generally, and sort of learning specific social cues and customs and stuff, which I feel like I can relate to myself in terms of the challenges I went through growing up. Of course, we know Russell T Davies was going to establish him as a queer character had the show carried on, whilst Luke's queerness was sadly never explored because of the circumstances that ends the show, sadly. I love how Russell still made him canonly queer in Farewell Sarah Jane, which has felt even more special to me since coming out, as I've always seen Luke as a role model, and it's very comforting to see him find happiness in himself and in Sanjay, which makes me feel like the same as possible for me. In terms of my favourite queer stories in the show, Eve of the Daleks is always going to be a special one for me. I just came out as bisexual on January 1st, 2022. So watching Yaz also come out around the same time really hit home for me. And the positivity that buzzed around it from other queer fans of the show was just beautiful. In terms of what it means to me to be a Doctor Who fan, I've always loved how Doctor Who as a show encourages people to be open to so many different shapes of life. So I think that makes our community's shared love for it all the more beautiful. I've often found a lot of my friendships were formed through a shared love of Doctor Who, even before I was very online in the Doctor Who fandom and meeting other queer fans like me at conventions and Gallifrey Cabaret. It's really enriched my experience in the fan base and my confidence as a queer man as well. I think going forward, I'm just really excited to see Russell write queer characters in a TV landscape that's become so much more progressive since his first era, especially with landmark queer shows like, say, Sex Education, Heartstopper, but also the advances Russell's made in his own work, like in Years and Years, and It's a Sin, with the rich characters he brought out in those shows that really does celebrate diversity in a beautiful way. I'd love to see him write a queer full-time companion at some point, especially a bisexual companion. Someone like Bill Potts would have fit in perfectly with Russell's style of Doctor Who, so yeah.
Ethan, thank you. Those are really lovely thoughts.
Thank you for sending that, Ethan. Yes, no, I completely agree with you. I relate on so many of those points. As mentioned before, I always related to Luke Smith as a character, and I was so sad that we didn't get to see on screen the original intentions of the character, and grateful that we did then get to see that in Farewell Sarah Jane. I love hearing, me and you have spoken about this on and off the podcast, but I love hearing your story about Eve of the Daleks and about how you relate to that with your coming out story. I feel like I don't think Doctor Who was on when I came out. I don't really relate it to my coming out specifically to the show, and it's so nice to hear that while you were going through that experience, you were watching Yaz on screen going through the exact same thing, and that sort of helped you in a way with your coming out. And I think it's resonating the point that we were making earlier, that when you see representation for yourself on screen, it kind of helps you realize that is a real possibility for yourself, and if they can do it, why can't I? And if they're being their true authentic self, I can too. So it's really nice to hear that you sort of related to that storyline.
Yeah, I really love those themes about feeling like an outsider and, wanting to fit in. And I think they tell those stories really well in the Sarah Jane Adventures, especially around Luke and, those characters who we really get to know across the series. And that's not something we've really dived into so much, but that was really great. And I'm really glad that I was kind of helping you navigate some of those things when you were growing up as well. Like, coming to terms with your sexuality is so hard on top of everything else that makes being a teenager hell. Like, secondary school is just the worst thing in the world. And I think anything that kind of softens that and can feel like a comfort is so important. And yeah, that's definitely how I felt about Doctor Who kind of being a constant in my life as well. And you're right. I think there's something nice as well about, Yaz as a character who is discovering her sexuality and coming to terms with it for the first time. And there's something she says in the Eve of the Daleks, I think, about like, Dan says, have you told her? And she's like, I don't even think I've admitted it to myself, or something along those lines. And so she's getting to grips with her sexuality as well, like in real time in the show, which is really interesting. And that's not something we got with Bill, because Bill's already sure of herself. So it's nice to show that that's kind of a valid experience as well, to be like questioning and not sure yet and not able to, like, I've had times and do have times when I can't put a confident label on my sexuality, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I've had you, Sam, or my boyfriend be like, so like, how do you, I'm like, I'm not sure. Maybe this, maybe that. So it's, it's difficult. It's difficult, and it's fine. And that's, it's all part of the journey. And, and looking to the future as well, I'm also so excited to see what they do next to keep pushing the boundary and, update the show for 2024.
2024, baby. We're going to see, talking about camp, you want to talk about Bonnie Langford driving the Doctor around on a motorcycle?
Yeah. Like,
camp is an orange, I think it might be a moped, like a bright orange moped, being driven by Mel.
It's yellow. I think it's Bessie yellow, that moped.
Oh my god, if it is Bessie coloured, that's amazing. I can't tell if it's yellow or orange in this set photo.
It is orange. It really looks like Bonnie on the front. I don't think it's shooting on the back though, is it?
I don't know. It must be a stunt
maybe
double.
They've got good doubles.
Must be really good doubles. And moving on to our final voice note, we're going to be listening to Matt Gavin talk about his relationship with Doctor Who.
Hey guys, my name's Matt. So I could talk to you for hours and hours about what Doctor Who means to me, but I wanted to focus on how, especially towards the end of Stephen Moffat's era, he writes the Doctor not just as a person, but also as an ideal, as an aspiration. He'll write that the Doctor is a promise that you make, for example, or he'll speak about how, I can't be the Doctor all the time. And really the idea that the Doctor is something that you can be. So I was at university throughout Capaldi's era, and having the Doctor question that identity after moving past his Time War guilt, it really resonated with me, because this guy is essentially my childhood hero, right? And I kind of felt like I was going through the same thing. I think a lot of people, especially queer people, find that they have to kind of rediscover and redefine themselves at uni. And as a fellow Hot Mess Express bisexual, I related really strongly to Clara. Watching herself kind of actively fashion herself after the Doctor, calling herself the Doctor in Flatline, to the extent that she eventually leaves the show as his equal, I found that really, really inspiring. It helped me consolidate my sense of identity and my values at a time of my life where that was really being challenged. I know Hellbent and its ending can be a little bit controversial, but I think it's so important that Clara gets that wiggle room in the end, because having the Doctor as that aspiration and then punishing someone for achieving it, I think would have been definitely the wrong thing to do. And just thinking about that line in Face the Raven, why can't I be like you, it gets me a bit choked up. Because she's right. Why shouldn't she be? And so to this day, I have a photo on my bedroom wall of Clara captioned, "What would she do?" And underneath I've written, "Same as you." Hopefully that doesn't end up in me being murdered by birds. Thank you for this podcast and everything that you do. I know it must be a massive amount of work. Take care of yourselves and have a lovely day.
Ah, thank you, Matt.
Thank you. It is a lot of work.
I really love that thought that's gone into, the Doctor not just as a person, but an idea and a promise. I really, really like that.
Yeah, me too. I think that they often touch on it in Doctor Who, but I think you're right that in Capaldi's era, that's when they've really sort of like homed in the message. Like Martha will talk about like the Doctor being a unifying thought for people all across the world, people across the universe. But yeah, I really liked your thoughts on the Doctor being a promise and something you can be. And I think that Clara is a really great example of, like you said, why can't she be like him? We can all be like him.
Yeah.
And
really interesting thought as well about being punished for achieving being him. I'm like,
there's levels.
Yeah, like she does, because like we've said before, right? Like she does reach his level. She does become his equal as far as someone can do as a human in that time frame, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, and I agree that I hope you don't end up being murdered by birds.
No, me too.
Yeah.
I have a couple of thoughts off the back of that. One, I think first and foremost, I think as well, alluding back to what Ethan was talking about, I think navigating being bisexual in particular, or being bi or pan, or something that isn't, straightforward in terms of your identity. I think anything complex in terms of kind of navigating your gender or sexuality, but particularly like around being bisexual, I think it's really confusing. And there's not a lot of good bi representation on TV. In fact, there's a lot of really nasty, harmful biphobic tropes out there, which I don't need to repeat. I'm not going to go through, like, for example, and it's a shame in a way, I guess, that they didn't go much deeper into Clara's characterization, because she was such a fab character that it would have been great if she was canonically bi, that they just lent into it just a little bit more. Maybe Danny Pink, who was frankly not the most interesting character in the Doctor Who universe, maybe that could have been someone else. Would have been so interesting. Danielle Pink, wouldn't that have been great? But yeah, and uni as well, like as a time for finding yourself. I think that limbo period between kind of finishing school and sort of starting adulthood properly, I remember I did so much growing up in that time. It's such a weird phase of your life, and it feels like you do kind of like 10 years of growing up in 3 years. That's how I felt.
No,
but
completely.
You feel like you come out a completely different person to like the child that went in. And even weirder, may I say, as a 27-year-old now, is the growing up that keeps happening, because you come out of uni like, well, I'm done now, like I'm cooked, and then you keep going and you're like, there was more. So it's yeah,
there's always more. Exactly. I like as well that you have your little picture of Clara. Matt actually sent in a photo of Clara on his bedroom wall, saying, "What would she do? Same as you." I think that's a really good mantra to do. I also really, really liked the way you called yourself a fellow hot mess express bisexual. I think that was so funny. I really want that as like a bumper sticker. Well, on that note, I just wanted to thank every single one of you who has taken the time to send in a voice note. I really, truly, both me and Alasdair are truly grateful. You've all been so well grateful. Articulated. You've been funny. You've been insightful. And it's just so lovely to hear people who have very similar experiences to you growing up that you've never met before. And thank you so much for listening to Wholala all across the world. I didn't quite realise that it sort of snuck up on me. I didn't realise the platform that we had, and getting voice notes from Washington and hearing from people from Canada and Scotland and good old London town, maybe. Like it's been really, truly lovely to hear your voice notes. So thank you so much from both of us.
No, like just to echo what you've said, Sam, like I'm shocked. Like I really didn't think we'd get such lovely, thoughtful voice notes. I was like, maybe we'll get 2 or 3, but I didn't expect, 8 people to take the time to send us a note. I'm really grateful for that, and from such different places and giving such different perspectives as well that we haven't even thought of. Even like 36 weeks in of talking about kind of queer themes in Doctor Who, there's still so much that we've like barely scratched the surface of, which is so interesting. So I've really loved this.
Yeah, it's been so lovely. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to this episode of Wholala. And happy Pride. Like, I know that June's ending, but the Pride celebrations will continue. You can always come to this queer little podcast to hear 2 queer besties talk about why they love this little show.
It's Pride Month every week, baby.
Every damn week.
Every damn week.
So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Wholala. As always, and especially with this topic, I really want to keep the conversation going. Please reach out to us on all of our socials. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, all of which are at Wholala Pod. And make sure that you go follow all of the wonderful people that sent us voice notes as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. And if you particularly enjoyed today's episode, which I hope you did, do remember to go and give us a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is you get your podcasts. Giving us a high rating helps to share this podcast with other Who fans like yourself.
And as always, we will see you next week.
See you soon.
Bye.